Let's try a little thought experiment. If someone told you there was a small island, only about the size of the US, state of West Virginia, that holds the highest density of waterfalls on Earth, once had a bridge connecting it to the mainland, was the origin of an English word that billions of people use every day without realizing it, and was fought over by all of Europe for centuries, just for one type of spice, where would you guess that is? Most people wouldn't guess Sri Lanka. And that's precisely the problem. Because Sri Lanka isn't just some ordinary country, forgotten in the giant shadow of India, Sri Lanka is one of those places where geography doesn't just shape the landscape. It rewrites history, creates languages, and determines who rules the seas for centuries. And all of it, from record-breaking waterfalls to colonial wars, from linguistics to geopolitics, comes from one single thing: its location on the map. But to understand why, we have to start with a very simple question. One whose answer will change everything you think you know about this land. Sri Lanka is an island, but was it always an island? If you look at a map of the waters between Sri Lanka and the southern tip of India, you'll see something strange hiding just beneath the surface. A roughly 50-kilometre chain of shoals and sandbanks connects the two landmasses, like the final pieces of an unfinished puzzle. In India, it's called Rama Setu. Westerners call it Adam's Bridge. But whatever its name, its geological nature is undeniable. These are the remnants of a natural land bridge that existed thousands of years ago. Geological evidence suggests this limestone chain was once entirely above sea level, high and stable enough for humans and animals to cross. The great migrations of the early Sinhalese and Tamil people most likely took place directly across this very bridge, with no need for boats, no waves to brave, just step on and walk. Then, major natural events, perhaps a violent storm, perhaps the gradual rise of sea levels over time, erased that connection. The Pork Strait deepened, permanently severing the two land masses. The waters rose, and Sri Lanka became a true island. But here's the fascinating part. The very moment it was cut off from the mainland is when it began to forge a uniqueness that no place on Earth could ever replicate. Think of how geographical isolation acts as a kind of biological time machine. Once Sri Lanka was separated from India, all the plants and animals on the island began to evolve on their own trajectory, no longer mixing with or competing against species from the mainland. Thousands of years passed in that evolutionary silence, and the result is what scientists call a biodiversity hotspot. One of the rarest places on the planet, with an unusually high rate of endemic species. To put that into perspective, consider the Sinharaja Forest Reserve, a UNESCO World Heritage Site, and Sri Lanka's last remaining patch of virgin rainforest. Within its dense canopy, over 60% of the tree species exist nowhere else on the planet. Endemic birds, reptiles, amphibians, and insects are packed together in an ecosystem that has evolved independently for millennia. This is the most vivid evolutionary laboratory geography has ever created. But isolation didn't just create biodiversity. It also created topography, and that topography in turn created a geographical record few would ever expect. Imagine you're standing on the flat coastal plains of Sri Lanka, looking toward the island's center. You'll see mountains that don't slope gently upwards, but instead rise abruptly, like a giant wall blocking your line of sight. These aren't the gentle slopes of the Alps or the Himalayas. These are sheer cliffs, mountainsides that slope at nearly 90 degrees, jutting up from the plains in just a few kilometers. And when the monsoon winds from the Indian Ocean slam into these mountain walls, the inevitable happens. All that water has only one way to go. The result is that Sri Lanka has the highest density of waterfalls on Earth. Over 382 recorded waterfalls in a land area smaller than the US state of West Virginia. Bambarakanda, the tallest, plunges more than 263 meters down a sheer cliff in one continuous, unending roar. This number isn't a coincidence. It's the inevitable and entirely predictable result of abrupt topography meeting intense monsoon winds. But what's even stranger is that this monsoon system doesn't work the way most people think. Sri Lanka is one of the very few places on Earth that gets two completely separate monsoon seasons from two different directions. The Yala monsoon, from May to August, brings heavy rain to the southwest. The Maha monsoon, from October to January, brings heavy rain to the northeast. And because the central mountain range acts as a natural wall between the two halves of the island, the rain can't get across, creating two completely opposite climates at the exact same time. The practical result is this. No matter what month of the year you visit Sri Lanka, there's always a sunny beach somewhere on the island. This isn't luck. This is geography, acting as a natural climate regulating system, and it explains why Sri Lanka has been an ideal stop for merchants and sailors for thousands of years. But this monsoon system also poses a deeper question, and it's one we need to answer to understand the whole story. If the northeast only receives rain during one short season of the year, how could ancient civilizations have survived and thrived in this dry region? The answer is one of the most incredible engineering feats of the ancient world, something most Westerners have never even heard of. Over 2,000 years ago, in the arid northeastern plains of Sri Lanka, farmers looked up at the dry season sky and asked, why must we depend on these few short months of rain when the land could be cultivated year-round? That question led to one of the most complex engineering systems ancient humanity ever built, on par with the aqueducts of Rome or the irrigation systems of ancient Egypt, yet it's almost never mentioned in Western textbooks. The ancient Sri Lankans built a massive network of reservoirs called Wewa, thousands of artificial lakes created by damming rivers and capturing the entire rainfall of the monsoon season. But the real genius wasn't the individual reservoirs, but how they were all interconnected. A network of canals hundreds of kilometers long, all calculated by the principles of gravity with astonishing precision, ensured that water flowed in the right direction, at the right volume, to the right fields that needed it, without any kind of pump. This was a hydraulic civilization, a society organized entirely around the management of water as a strategic resource. And what's incredible is that many of those ancient reservoirs are still in operation today, still providing water for Sri Lankan agriculture after more than 2 millennia. Pause for a moment and let that number sink in. 2,000 years. The same irrigation system, still functioning. But if Sri Lanka had such a highly developed civilization so early on, what turned it into a target for the world's largest empires for centuries on end? The answer is a plant. And not just any plant. If you put yourself in the shoes of an Arab merchant in the 10th century and looked at a map of the Indian Ocean, you would see it immediately. Sri Lanka lies at the exact crossroads of every major maritime route connecting Southeast Asia, India, the Middle East, and Africa. Whoever controlled this island controlled a critical part of the global trade network. But its strategic location was just the reason people paid attention. What made them fight over it was what grew from the island's soil. Cinnamomum verum, the true cinnamon of Sri Lanka, is a completely different species from the cassia cinnamon you find almost everywhere else in the world. Its flavor is more delicate, more complex, and sweeter, without being harsh. And it can only thrive in the specific coastal soil and tropical climate conditions that Sri Lanka provides. Nowhere else on Earth could replicate those conditions. In the Middle Ages and the European Renaissance, this cinnamon was sold at the same price as gold. That is not a literary metaphor. That is a literal economic fact. Imagine that a kilogram of Sri Lankan cinnamon could be traded for an equivalent amount of gold in the markets of Venice or Lisbon in the 15th century. At the time, Europeans didn't know where cinnamon came from, because Arab merchants held a monopoly on the root and refused to reveal its source. Stories were fabricated about giant birds that carried cinnamon from some mysterious land, about dangerous swamps that had to be crossed to obtain it, all to maintain the secret and keep the price high. When the Portuguese arrived in the Indian Ocean in the early 16th century and finally discovered the true source of cinnamon, their reaction was not surprise. Their reaction was invasion. In the year 1505, the Portuguese landed in Sri Lanka. This was not a scientific expedition. This was a military campaign with a very clear economic objective to control the world's only source of cinnamon. But Portugal didn't hold it for long. The Dutch arrived in the mid-17th century with a stronger navy, drove out the Portuguese, and established their own monopoly on the cinnamon trade. Then the British came in the late 18th century, replaced the Dutch, and held the island until 1948. 3 European nations, one after another, spanning nearly 4 centuries, all because of the geography of a plant that could not grow anywhere else. But the story of the Europeans on this island is not just about cinnamon. What's truly astonishing is what happened when the revenue from cinnamon was no longer enough to justify the costs of the colony, and the British had to find a new product to exploit. That decision would permanently change not only the island's landscape, but also its social fabric, and the entire nation's path to war. Look at the lush green hills of central Sri Lanka. The endless terraced tea plantations, shimmering green in the morning mist, are the most iconic image most outsiders recall when they think of this country. Those photos appear on the covers of travel magazines, on wall calendars, and on the phone screens of millions of people. But here's what no one tells you. That entire landscape is completely man-made, born from a disaster. Before the mid-19th century, the central hills of Sri Lanka were coffee forests. The British had turned the entire highlands into a giant, open-air coffee factory, and Sri Lanka became one of the world's largest coffee exporters at the peak of that era. Then, in the 1860s, a tiny fungus named Himalaya vastatrix began to spread through the coffee plantations across the island. Coffee rust didn't kill the plants immediately, but slowly destroyed their ability to photosynthesize, causing the leaves to turn yellow, gradually fall off, and the plant to die after several seasons. In less than a decade, the entire Sri Lankan coffee industry completely collapsed. Faced with economic disaster, the British didn't leave. They did the opposite. They clear-cut what was left, leveled the mountainsides, and switched to growing tea. And this is where geography once again intervened in a way no one could have planned. The altitude of the highlands, the cool climate, the just right amount of rainfall, not too much, not too little, and the morning mist that blanketed the hillsides. All of these geographical factors turned out to be more perfect for tea than anything else in the world. Sri Lankan tea, or Ceylon tea, was quickly recognized as one of the finest teas in the world. Today, Sri Lanka is one of the top 5 tea exporters in the world, and that entire massive tea economy is built on a man-made landscape created from an agricultural disaster. But here is something that most outsiders don't realize when they admire those beautiful tea fields. The labor force on the tea plantations was not the native Sinhalese people. The British brought hundreds of thousands of laborers from southern India, people of Indian Tamil descent, to work on these plantations. They lived in separate camps and spoke Tamil, but had completely different origins from the Tamil community that had settled in northern Sri Lanka centuries earlier. A colonial economic decision to plant tea to replace the dead coffee created a new population that was entirely distinct in culture, language, religion, and history from both the Sinhalese and the northern Tamils. 3 communities on one small island, 3 distinct identities, and a colonial state that left in 1948 without leaving behind any framework for those 3 communities to coexist peacefully. Do you see this chain of cause and effect? The geography of tea created a geography of people. The geography of people created political tension, and the political tension created a 26-year civil war from 1983 to 2009, one of the bloodiest conflicts in Asia in the 20th century. But no one traces that story back to its starting point, a fungus named Himalaya vastatrix that killed the coffee in the 1860s. And this is the most important point in this entire story. When we look at a map of Sri Lanka and wonder why such a small island carries so much history, so many events, so many layers of culture and conflict, the answer is neither random, nor is it about the character of any particular people. The answer is that geography acts as a resonance system, in which every element amplifies the others in ways no one could have anticipated. Let's piece it all together again. But this time, chronologically. The land bridge, erased by natural events, turned Sri Lanka into an island, allowing biodiversity to flourish over thousands of years of isolation. The central mountainous terrain creates dual monsoons and a record density of waterfalls. The dry northeastern region forced ancient peoples to create a genius irrigation system, allowing civilization to develop where nature said it was impossible. Its location at the crossroads of the Indian Ocean made the island an indispensable stop on every major trade route. The coastal climate produced unique cinnamon, attracting Arabs, then the Portuguese, then the Dutch, and then the British for nearly 4 centuries. The British planted tea to replace the coffee that died from disease, and to do that, they displaced hundreds of thousands of people from India, creating a complex demographic structure. That demographic structure, left unresolved when colonialism ended, became the trigger for the longest civil war in the modern history of South Asia. None of these factors are independent. They are all a chain of cause and effect stemming from one common point: the geographical location and natural conditions of a small island in the Indian Ocean. But the story has one final detail that most people overlook, and this is the strangest detail of all. Every day, billions of people around the world use an English word without knowing that it comes from the name of Sri Lanka. That word is serendipity, which is a fortunate, unexpected discovery, the moment when you accidentally find something good that you weren't looking for. The story begins with the ancient name for Sri Lanka. For centuries, Arab and Persian traders called this island Serendip, a word with roots in Sanskrit that means Lion Island. In 1754, an English writer named Horace Walpole read an old Persian tale about the three princes of Serendip, who constantly made accidental discoveries of good things on their journey, even though they weren't looking for them. He named that ability serendipity. The word then spread throughout the entire English language, then entered dozens of other languages, and is now used in science, art, and philosophy to describe one of the most important types of human discovery. A small island in the Indian Ocean has given its name to a philosophical concept that the entire modern world uses daily without even knowing its origin. And that perfectly reflects Sri Lanka's true position in human history, always more important than people realize, always influencing things larger than itself, but rarely given the credit it deserves. When we put it all together, we begin to see a much clearer picture than what textbooks or tourist maps can show. Sri Lanka isn't a small country with a big history because of luck, or because of the special character of its people. Sri Lanka is a small country with a big history because its geography created conditions that larger powers could not ignore, forcing its inhabitants to adapt, innovate, and sometimes fight to survive through the centuries. The ancient irrigation systems were humanity's answer to an arid geography. Cinnamon was a gift of climatic conditions that couldn't be replicated anywhere else. The tea plantations are proof of the ability to adapt when disaster strikes. And the Civil War was the consequence of geoeconomic decisions, whose repercussions no one foresaw until it was too late. That is the true power of geography, when it operates not in breadth, but in depth. And looking at the map today, seeing Sri Lanka still standing there at the crossroads of the Indian Ocean, the question isn't what Sri Lanka became in the past. The real question is much bigger and much more urgent for the world today. The Indian Ocean is becoming the center of new geopolitical competition in the 21st century. China is building the Hambantota deepwater port right on Sri Lanka's southern coast, not just for commercial purposes, but also for its military strategic significance, which any geopolitical analyst can see immediately. India is increasing its investments to create a counterbalance. The United States is watching closely. A small island the size of West Virginia has suddenly become one of the most important geopolitical hotspots of the 21st century. But here's the interesting thing. None of this is new. This is exactly what happened when the Portuguese arrived in the 16th century, when the Dutch pushed them out in the 17th century, and when the British replaced the Dutch in the 18th century. Sri Lanka's geography hasn't changed. Only the names of the competing empires have changed. History doesn't repeat itself, but geography is always there, patient, unchanging, waiting to once again decide who will write the next page of the story. The question that remains is, this time, will the Sri Lankan people get to be the ones who write that page, or will they once again become the playground for others?